Welcome to Hearthside Lore.
The Wood Elf Army. The inhabitants of Athel Loren are mysterious and secretive beings, rarely seen beyond their forest homeland, and thus little understood by the outside world. In the defense of their woodland realm, the Wood Elves and their allies are deadly and unforgiving. They follow a path walked by no other, and often appear capricious or cruel, though in truth, each harmful act they perform is always balanced by one of beneficence. The Wood Elves are an elite army, formed around a core of highly skilled elf archers, and supported by the mysterious spirit beings of Athel Loren. They are a secretive and mercurial folk who seek only to preserve the continued safety of the forest in which they dwell. Those who are foolish enough to set foot within their woodland realm, or otherwise threaten the sanctity of Athel Loren, invite the fury of the Wood Elves, whether in open combat or through sudden ambush. All Wood Elves are archers of unparalleled skill, but other martial disciplines can also be found amongst their warriors. The Glade Riders and Warhawk Riders are swift and skillful beastmasters, striking with speed before the foe can react. The Wild Riders are deadly and relentless huntsmen, driven by the ferocity of the ancient god Kurnos, while the Eternal Guard are stoic and determined warriors who will fight to the death for their lords and home. In contrast, the War Dancers of Loak are the most agile of all Wood Elves, whose grace and sublime skills are used to lethal effect in battle. The skills at the command of the Wood Elves are immense and varied, yet when they go to war, they do not go alone. When danger threatens the forest, Athel Loren itself awakes to confront the assailant. The curious sentience of the ancient wood manifests itself in many different ways, from the lithe and spiteful dryads, the legions of ephemeral spites, gnarled and tough treekin, to the most powerful beings within Athel Loren, the mighty tree men. Against a common foe, elves and forest creatures fight as one, combining the skill of the elder race with the sheer elemental power and ferocity of the forest. While the Eternal Guard, Glade Guard, and Treekin form the backbone of the army, Quicksilver Dryads, War Dancers, and Beast Riders slip around the flanks, unleashing deadly and swift attacks upon the opposing army. Athel Loren. The oldest of all the forests of the Old World, its most ancient trees having grown from saplings seeded by the Old One's servants. Athel Loren is a mystical place whose shadow lies far across the land. The oldest of the forests of the Old World, its most ancient trees having grown from saplings seeded by the Old One's servants, Athel Loren is a mysterious place whose shadow lies far across the land. Whether it was the Old Ones that granted strange life to these woods, or perhaps the coming of chaos that awoke the trees, it is impossible to say. All that can be said is that in the dawn of time, the trees began to think in a way that trees are not meant to, and that they learned of feelings such as anger and hate. The forest became aware of itself, and of the other races crawling like insects upon the world, and it was not pleased with their intentions. Standing stones carved with worn elven runes mark the borders of the primeval realm, beyond which giant trees loom, their branches moving slowly, straining to escape the magical barrier of the watchstones. Roots twist and claw across the fern-covered rocks and loam, and low mists coil and spread throughout its hollows and glades. This verdant labyrinth unsettles even the most courageous soul, filled with movement, glimpsed from the corner of the eye, strange noises, and the feeling that one is being watched at all times. There is a slumbering awareness and a sense of watchfulness that permeates each leafy glade and winding track. Dark forms move through the twisting branches and dense undergrowth. Tiny darting shapes flit between the trees on the very edge of vision. Athel Loren sees and feels everything within its boundaries, and is watchful and secretive, perfectly willing to destroy those that seek to enter. Only the insanely brave, mad or foolish, dare to cross into Athel Loren, for the forest is a haunted place, filled with unquiet, malicious spirits. The forest of Athel Loren defies the natural laws of the world, and time flows strangely within its bounds. An individual that treks under the dark boughs for what may only seem like a couple of hours may, if he survives, return home to find that 100 years have passed. Equally, one might wander lost within Athel Loren for decades, only to find that scant minutes have passed in the outside world. Athel Loren is more alive than any normal forest, and landmarks and glades shift and move. What was open clearing one night may be heavily wooded the next morning, and pathways often disappear or turn back on themselves within hours. Most that try to enter Athel Loren find themselves constantly returning to where they started, despite their best efforts to make headway. Even if they try and walk a straight path, they invariably find themselves turned around and facing out of the forest. Most travelers that persist in entering Athel Loren are found on its outskirts as little more than gibbering wrecks, their sanity shredded by whatever horrors they witnessed in the magical forest. That is, if they return. But there are those spirits whose hearts are not darkened to the other living creatures of the world. The fortunate or the worthy might occasionally find passage between the changing paths, guided perhaps by a welcome shaft of sunlight, or coming across a forest trail at an unexpected turn. So it is that there are always those that would dare the secrets of the dark forest, to learn its secrets, or drawn by fanciful tales of treasure and hidden knowledge to be won. Throughout Athel Loren are the magical halls of the elven lords. These places are filled with ghostly music, laughter that sounds like the wind blowing through trees in autumn, and soft glowing light. The mighty entrance doors to the elven halls are woven from the trunks of ancient trees, or delve into the turf of the hillside. They are hidden to those the elves do not welcome, though they might pass within a few paces of such portals. Those that enter through one of these strange gateways find themselves in a grand, beautiful cavern deep below the tree or hill. Roots can be seen far above, curving down from the roof of the hall to form elegant interweaving pillars. Here the wood elves make their homes, fine structures of ethereal beauty. Elegant lanterns adorn the hall, filled with tiny flitting glowing figures. Here the wood elves feast and celebrate the natural cycles of the forest, holding grand banquets of woodland game and free-flowing, intoxicating elven wines. The halls are alive with wild dancing, lilting laughter, and melodic music. Boy children taken from the lands around the forest, destined never to grow old, joyfully serve their graceful elven masters. It is not unheard of for outsiders, such as Bretonian questing knights, to on occasion join an elven feast. but it is a foolish individual indeed that would eat or drink the foodstuffs of the elves without invitation. Elves have dwelt around and within Athel Loren for almost 5,000 years. Over this time they have become intrinsically linked with their forest home, and their nature has changed to reflect Athel Loren. Forsaking their ties to other elven folk, the wood elves have become deeply secretive and suspicious, and shun all outsiders. They are the guardians of the forest, and their fate is utterly entwined with that of Athel Loren. If the forest were to die, the wood elves would die with it. Capricious and unpredictable, the wood elves have been likened to a force of nature, neither truly good nor evil. Athel Loren and the wood elves are far removed from simple comparison with the values held by other races. Like a placid lake, the wood elves can appear serene, beautiful and enchanting, or as frightening and destructive as a storm. For every intruder that the wood elves guide out of Athel Loren, another is slain without question or remorse, and left where he falls to be claimed by the forest. Bones and skulls can often be seen on the outskirts of Athel Loren, many with arrows protruding from ribs or embedded in eye sockets, before they are obscured and covered by twisting roots and undergrowth, or taken away by forest animals. Ever watchful and vigilant, the wood elves guard Athel Loren ceaselessly. Even those who enter the forest with no ill intention are regarded with suspicion and resentment, and will often come to a bad end. The wood elves have a distinct lack of interest in the goings-on of the world outside of the forest, and care little for those who are not their own. On occasion they must take part in wars and battles beyond the borders of their forest, in order to save their homes from future threat. But this is rare indeed. If the wood elves could live their lives without interference from the world beyond their Fey lands, then they would do so gladly. However, Athel Loren is constantly assailed by those that seek to invade and corrupt it, and they must wage an unending battle against those despoilers. Unparalleled archers are almost unnaturally stealthy. The wood elves are a deadly foe to face. Those that they slay will rarely have even glimpsed their enemy before being struck down by unerringly accurate arrows from the dense woods. Swift and silent, the wood elves erupt from the trees in sudden bursts of savagery, ruthlessly cutting down their enemies, before vanishing like ghosts into the depths of the forest. The history of the wood elves. For over 8,000 years of recorded history, the long-lived and graceful elves have lived on their island home of Ulthuan. Over this time they have explored much of the world, sailing far from their home and discovering many new and unusual lands. For thousands of years they did not view any of these far-away shores as places to settle, for their bountiful and varied island home provided all that they could wish for. It was only after Ulthuan was racked by the forces of chaos, and after the death of the first Phoenix King Anarion, the fiercest elven warrior ever to live, that the elves began to look at the lands beyond their coast as places to settle. During the reign of the Phoenix King Bel-Shanar, who ruled Ulthuan more than 4,000 years before the birth of the human hero Sigmar, the elves began to colonize the world, while the barbaric ancestors of humans fought amongst themselves. The elves became the undisputed rulers of the seas. Their elegant, white-sailed ships cut across the globe, and they mapped the oceans, charted the lands, and set up many settlements. The largest concentration of colonies were based in a land they named Elfin Arvan, which became known by the younger races as the Old World. They established contact with the dwarves, and a great era of trade and friendship began between the two races. In the lands that would one day be known as Bretonia, the Empire, and Kislev, the elves built tall, delicate towers of marble and gold. Many of the elven colonists became strongly attached to their new homes, happy to make a new start and forget the unhappiness and strife that had plagued Ulthuan in the previous millennia, slowly recovering from the horrors that they had witnessed when chaos had overrun the fair isle. While most of the elves retained strong connections to Ulthuan over the following thousands of years, the first generation of elves born within Elfin Arvan felt little attachment to their ancestral homeland. When strife once again began to assail Ulthuan in the insidious guise of the cult of pleasure, many elves chose to return to Ulthuan, but there were those who believed that the Phoenix King and his rule had little to do with their lives, and many of these elves moved themselves further inland. Athel Loren. It was these elves who first encountered the strange and frightening forest that spread from the foothills of the Grey Mountains and the vaults. The forest was filled with all manner of life, and the elves constantly felt eyes upon them. At night they saw strange lights dancing in the darkness, and huge shapes lingered on the outskirts of the glades. Intrigued by what they saw, the elves attempted to push deep into the dark forest, but found themselves thwarted at every turn. 3 times did the elves send expeditions into the forest, each numbering nearly 1,000 warriors. Of the first expedition, 700 elves came out the wood scant hours after they had departed, with tales of many fruitless days spent traveling along shifting glades and pathways that curved back on themselves. The second expedition vanished without a trace. Of the third foray, only a single elf returned, her face ashen and drawn, and her body lacerated and bloody. She died a day later, driven witless by her dreams. It was clear that the place perceived the elves as a threat, and was actively resisting their attempt to dwell within its depths. The elves realized that this magical forest was sentient, like one giant all-encompassing living creature, and those that it saw as a threat it would resist. The elves named the forest Athel Loren. They retreated to the outskirts and planted great magical waystones about the boundaries. Still, some elves would occasionally go missing, lured deep into the forest by beautiful ghost-like nymphs, never to be seen again. Despite this, on the whole, Athel Loren seemed able to tolerate the elves so long as they did not attempt to venture too far into its dark interior. Nevertheless, the elves were inexplicably drawn to Athel Loren and learnt to treat it with great respect. The Sundering. Far away, an age of tragedy and resentment was dawning. The Phoenix King Belshazzar met with his death after being shamed by the insidious machinations of the black-hearted Prince Malekith, who secretly desired the Phoenix throne for himself. Malekith's madness became publicly known after he was horribly disfigured when trying to prove his claim for the throne by stepping willingly into the sacred flame of Asurion. The elven nobles rose against him and drove him and his followers back to the prince's homelands of Nagarath in the north of Ulthuan. A new Phoenix King was elected, and a bloody campaign ensued against the hate-filled Malekith and his followers. This was the time known as the Sundering, the time of great divide, when millions of elves lost their lives and the elven nation was ripped apart. Thus the elves became a divided people, splitting to become the Dark Elves and the High Elves. The Dark Elves made pacts with demons and literally tore apart the realm of Ulthuan. With dark magics they shattered the land and created the mighty floating fortress known as the Black Arks. Filled with bitterness and hatred, the Dark Elves turned their backs on Ulthuan, swearing vengeance, and sailed west to Nagaroth. The War of the Beard. More strife was to come in the following centuries, when the relationship between the increasingly arrogant High Elves of Ulthuan and the greed-filled dwarves was shattered, and another war began. Fatefully called the War of the Beard by the High Elves, it was those elves living in the Old World who bore the brunt of the war. Many of the Old World elves resented this war, launched by the new Phoenix King, Calador II, from thousands of miles away on Ulthuan. The mighty armies of Ulthuan landed at the elven city ports to face their enemies, and the Phoenix King demanded that the Elthin Arvan elves fight alongside them. Most did so, but many of those living on the borders of Athel Loren refused to become involved. The resentment of the Elthin Arvan elves grew, for it was the lands they called home that were being burnt and ravaged. Their homes were being razed to the ground, and their children that were being slain. The High Elf realm had been battered now by thousands of years of warfare, and after the death of Calador II, the new Phoenix King Caradriel knew that his people would not sustain such conflict much longer, especially as Malekith, the Witch King, was preparing his armies to invade Ulthuan. The Phoenix King could not fight a war on two fronts, so it was that he made the difficult decision to retreat from the Old World and abandon it to the dwarves and the rising race of men. Word came to the Old World of the Phoenix King's decree that if the colonists wanted the protection of his armies, they must return to their island homeland. Though this was greeted with uproar, the next decade saw the long retreat from the Old World, and the fledgling cities and towns of Elthin Arvan were abandoned. The elves living in the shadow of Athel Loren never considered returning to Ulthuan, for not one of them any longer felt ties with that land, and they declared themselves independent of the Phoenix throne, taking the name Osrai for themselves. As much as they could, they had kept themselves out of the War of the Beard. However, now that the elves had abandoned their cities, the dwarves were unopposed. As the first snows of winter began to fall, they marched from the mountains and descended into Athel Loren, hacking and burning. This callous action drove the forest into a fury. Mighty treemen awoke from their slumber, and merciless dryads manifested to fight the dwarves. However, during the long winter months, Athel Loren is at its most vulnerable, and these forest spirits were soon defeated. Athel Loren drew back from the encroaching dwarves and opened up pathways that thrust them onto the elven settlements, thinking themselves under attack. It was then that the elves intervened, and they descended on the dwarves, filling the air with volleys of deadly arrows. Whenever the dwarves turned to face this threat, the elves slipped away into the trees, circling back around the slow and cumbersome foe, to attack them once again from a different angle. In this manner, the dwarves were slowly whittled down, and their advance parties slaughtered without a single elven life lost. After countless running battles within the trees, the remaining dwarves retreated, having learnt to distrust the ancient and magical place. The birth of the Wood Elves. Following their victory, the Elves began to dwell deeper within the borders of Athel Loren, now fearing reprisals from the dwarves more than they did the capricious nature of the forest. In the years that followed, the Elves divided into different groups, called kindreds or kinbands, each individual seeking out the company of others with whom their ideals were in accord. With each kinband driven by different views and ideologies, it was only a matter of time before quarrels and disagreements broke out, and the Elves of Athel Loren began to separate and go their different ways. Each group pushed on deeper into the forest, deeper than any had previously gone. Strangely, it seemed that the forest did not now resist them. Indeed, it seemed that Athel Loren now chose to open up many of its secrets to the kinbands. At the very heart of Athel Loren, a wandering kinband of magi happened upon the Oak of Ages, a mighty tree, incredibly ancient and gnarled by the passage of time. It was here that one of their number, Ariel, truly spoke with the forest for the first time. Before long, many of the elven magi were able to communicate with Athel Loren itself, and reasoned that the forest was slowly recognizing the elves as a beneficial force. This was particularly apparent in the icy winters of Athel Loren, for during these cold months, Athel Loren became virtually dormant. It was then that the elves, always respectful of all things natural, truly embraced Athel Loren as their home, for that was when Athel Loren truly embraced the elves. More than that, they treated Athel Loren with the awe and reverence it deserved and demanded, seeing the essence of their ancestral gods in its seasonal cycles. They vowed never to take from the forest without giving back equally in service and sacrifice, and in this manner they slowly gained the trust of the forest. When the elves needed wood to burn in order to survive the icy winters, they would take only fallen branches, and in the spring they would nurture and tend to new saplings, encouraging them to shape graceful halls above and below the ground. Though they would hunt the animals of the forest for food and clothing, they used all that they took, and gave thanks to Athel Loren in ceremonies of blood. Yet even now some tension remained between the elves and their woodland home, for they were still two separate parts, and not a single whole. The southeast corner of the forest, a shadowy and foreboding place, remained sealed to the elves, and all who attempted to enter it were lost forever. The great tree lord Durthu, scarred forever by the axes of the dwarves, treated the elves at best with distrustful neutrality that bordered upon hostility. Yet the fates of Athel Loren and the Wood Elves would soon become irrevocably joined. The Great Council. 1125 years before the coming of Sigmar, the dwarves came once more to Athel Loren in the autumn months, marching down from the Grey Mountains and deep into the pine crags. With winter fast approaching, the spirits of the forest were rapidly becoming lethargic and could offer little resistance. Worse, the elven kindreds of the pine crags were small and disorganized. Though the first dwarven incursion was halted and repulsed, war-hawk rioters brought tidings that the rapacious tree-slayers were assembled in even greater numbers in the high reaches of the Grey Mountains. So dire was this threat considered to be that a council of the kinbands was called, the first such gathering since the elves had taken up residence within Athel Loren. The great lords and ladies of the Wood Elves held council at the foot of the Oak of Ages, and even the trees of the glade crowded close, as if paying attention to what was said. Though not all the kindreds had sent representation, it remained an assemblage of great power and wisdom. The devotees of the trickster god Loic performed their ritual dances, and the seers and the prophetesses read the skeins of fate in the stars and patterns of flame. In the firelit glade, the elven sorceress Ariel found herself drawn to the lord of the greatest of the hunter kindreds, Orion. He was the bravest and most handsome of his folk, as Ariel was the wisest and fairest of hers, a cunning hunter in whom thought and instinct melded as one. Whilst the council debated how best to oppose the dwarves, Ariel and Orion were deep in a conversation of their own, seemingly oblivious to the great matters that were discussed around them. After many hours of debate and feasting, the elves were dismayed, for, even assembled and united as they were, their numbers were not sufficient to meet the dwarves in battle. It was then that Adonhu, greatest and eldest of the tree lords, strode into the glade, though not even the most keen-sighted of the assembled elves had been aware of his presence until that moment. If the elves were to strike the dwarves now, spoke the Ancient One, before autumn faded into winter entire, the forest would fight at the side of the elves, for this danger threatened them all. Emboldened by Adonhu's words, the elves prepared their plans anew, and in their enthusiasm were heedless of the Ancient One's warning that a great sacrifice would be required of them. As Adonhu addressed the council, Ariel and Orion slipped away, apparently unnoticed by all, as they left the glade and entered the deep wood. It was not until many hours later, when the feast was over, that their absence was noted, an absence that provoked great anger from the assembled elves, for it was unheard of that an elf should choose one from another kin-band as a lover. Enraged, the lords of the Asrai demanded that the two errant lovers were found and brought before the council. The elves hunted Ariel and Orion in the forest about the council glade for many long hours, until the golden rays of dawn pierced the leaves. Skillful as they were, the hunters could find no trace of their quarry's passage, and slowly the lords' anger faded, and their thoughts became suffused with concern. As the search wore on, and hope became ever bleaker, the elves sought Adonhu's aid, yet the great being remained silent in the face of their pleas. Mages attempted to converse with the trees, yet received no answers. Dryads were sought, yet none could be found. Reluctantly, and with great sadness, the Asrai nobles accepted that the lovers were lost to them, and turned their thoughts to the battle ahead. As autumn faded from the world, the wood elves marched into the mountains above the pine crags, and brought the dwarves to battle. As Adonhu had promised them, the Asrai did not fight alone. To the dwarves it must have seemed as if all of Athel Loren had emptied, for mighty treekin strode amongst the elven lines, and great hosts of dryads swarmed about their flanks, all of them preceded by the enraged form of Durthu, who strode ahead like an unstoppable force of nature as he sought to revenge himself in full upon the dwarven race that had scarred him. Against this attack, even the stubbornness of dwarves could not endure, and they retreated to their holds. They did not trouble Athel Loren again for many hundreds of years, though the Book of Grudges contains numerous reference to the battle they call Karazhan. The Winter of Woe. As winter fell upon Athel Loren, an icy wind whistled through the boughs of the forest, and a chill gripped the land like never before. The forest grew still, and the spirits of tree and earth slept away the long, dark nights. But this was to be no silent winter spent in slumber while awaiting the joyous return of spring. Driven by hunger and bloodlust, Hordes of orcs and goblins poured down from the mountains, burning the trees of Athel Loren and hunting its beasts. The elves fought bravely, but the spirit of unity that had been forged to oppose the dwarves was lacking, and they were forced to yield ground. In an orgy of wanton destruction, the orcs built great pyres, and pillars of smoke stained the sky with the ashes of the living wood of the forest. Midwinter came and went. The ground turned as hard as iron. Dark wolves hunted through the forest as the orcs pushed deeper and deeper. Despite the efforts of the elves, the green-skinned invaders were soon drawn up before the twisted form of the Oak of Ages itself. Orc campfires burned throughout the night as the elves readied themselves for battle, for the Ozrai feared that the fate of the Oak of Ages would rule that of the forest. They did so with heavy hearts, for they did not believe that they could stand before the horde that opposed them, but resolved to die to the last in defense of their home. As morning broke, they saw that the forest was transformed. The winter snows were in retreat, and blood-red blossoms had pushed through the hard ground. The animals of the forest roused from their hibernation, and a restlessness could be felt on the air, as of a mighty force awakening. Even as the orcs prepared for battle, they too saw the signs of the forest's rebirth. The haunting cry of a mighty horn echoed on the wind, accompanied by the baying of hounds and the shrieks of birds of prey as they flocked from their roosts. Then a mighty form crashed through the woods, a pack of shadowy hunting hounds at his heels. Tall and muscular, the elves recognized the awesome form of Kurnos himself, brandishing his mighty spear and bellowing his challenge to the orcs. A fierce primal energy swelled from Kurnos, and all the elves who looked upon him were filled with furious energy and power. Kurnos smashed into the orcs, slaying all before him in a whirlwind of destruction that was terrible to behold. His wild hunt sweeping forwards on howling winds, newly awakened dryads swarming in his wake, dark-pinioned ravens swooping down on the doomed orcs, and leaping hounds tore them apart with fang and claw. As the living god plunged deeper into the orcish lines, the elves charged forwards, their eyes afire with their god's furious power, and slaughtered the orcs without mercy. As the sun set at the day's end, not a single orc remained alive, and the exhausted elves followed the trail of destruction wrought by their god to the Oak of Ages itself. Here they discovered the enthroned figures of Ariel and Orion, now become aspects of Aisha, the mother goddess of elves, and Kurnos, the hunter. In a great council, all the kindreds of the forest paid homage to Ariel and Orion, the queen and king of the wood. In the aftermath of the battle, Ariel used her power to heal the damage that had been wrought, her touch infusing the ruined and desolate areas of the forest with new life. Throughout the summer months, Athel Loren knew relative peace, for any incursions were swiftly scattered by Orion's fury. Many elves, the song of the hunt deep in their being, were drawn to the demigod's hunts and welcomed a portion of his power into their hearts. Thus they became the Wild Riders, the equerries of the king in the wood, whose service and rituals maintained the eternal spirit of the hunter. Summer faded into autumn, and whilst Ariel's powers remained as potent as first they had in the early days of spring, Orion's power gradually faded, and his anger diminished, until finally, as winter's iron grip took hold of the forest, he was all but spent. As the snows closed on the forest, a mighty pyre was built in the center of the king's glade, and its flames reached high into the sky. as part of a ritual that would forevermore echo down the centuries. When midnight approached and the chill of winter was at its most biting, the wild riders and Orion marched into the clearing, and the king of the wild hunt stepped naked into the fire, the flames consuming him as he raised his arms to the heavens. All night the fire blazed until the winter sun climbed over the gray mountains. In the cold light of day, no trace of Orion remained, save his ashes. The wild riders bore the ashes away in silence and brought them to the council glade, where Ariel took them deep into the Oak of Ages and sealed herself and the ashes of her consort away from the outside world. In all the years since, as the snows retreat and the breach of spring is felt once more on the air, the forest has trembled with the waking dreams of Orion. In all the years since, as the snows retreat and the breach of spring is felt once more on the air, the forest has trembled with the waking dreams of Orion. The wild riders come for the elf chosen to take up the mantle of Ariel's consort king, though their selection is shrouded in mystery, even to the other elves who hold it to be ill luck to attract the attention of Orion's riders. The day before the vernal equinox, the elf chosen to become the new king of the wild hunt is garlanded with new blooming flowers and painted with mystical sigils before being led into the Oak of Ages. The following morning, on the first day of spring, Ariel awakens from her slumbers, and the reborn Orion thunders from the trees, the wild hunt howling at his heels. The Corruptor awakens. It was in the decades after the Winter of Woe that Ariel first became aware of a malignant and aberrant presence that would prove to be her nemesis. The existence of this being was of great offense to Ariel, standing for everything that she opposed, its very being antithesis to her. This creature the Wood Elves called Cairns, the Corruptor, though other peoples know it as Morgur, the Master of Skulls. Where it finds civilization, it tears it down, and where it finds beauty, it despoils it. A twisted creature, a horrible mix of human and beast, Ariel recognized it as an important spirit of chaos, existing only to corrupt, to despoil, to cause pain. And it is this creature that the Wood Elves despise above all others. Cairns warps and distorts the fabric of the world into vile and hateful forms wherever its cursed hooves tread. Under its breath, healthy trees wither and contort into pained shapes, and grass shrivels and turns black under its gaze. Ariel felt the taint of this creature, just as it too sensed her presence in the world and recognized her as adversary. It was at this time that the beastmen first began to descend on Athel Loren, hacking and burning. These early forays were easily defeated by the Wood Elves and the spirits defending Athel Loren, but they proved to be just the beginning. Around this time, human barbarians began to cross the Grey Mountains into the lands they later named as Bretonia. The Elves had long abandoned this land, leaving in their passing only their abandoned elegant towers and settlements. Many of them had been ripped down and burnt, for greenskins had overrun the lands with the retreat of the elves and the dwarves. The superstitious and ignorant barbarians avoided these places, fearing that they were haunted. Warlike and fierce, these early Bretoni tribesmen began to cleanse the lands of the orc and goblin menace, as well as warring upon each other. Their early attempts to penetrate Athel Loren left very few survivors, and those unhappy few were stripped of their sanity. Athel Loren entered into folklore amongst the humans as a fey, haunted place, and they avoided it whenever they could, and most were respectful of its boundaries. 2 centuries after the arrival of the Bretoni, the cursed beastman Cairns made his first attempt to claim Athel Loren. Responding to his silent call came thousands of beastmen and other horribly mutated creatures, many of which traveled hundreds of miles to fight at his side. These creatures flocked to him, drawn by the will of the gods of chaos. They swarmed from the vast tracts of uncontrolled forests over the gray mountains, crawled forth from their stinking caves in the vaults and the massive oracles, and stalked out of the forest of Arden and Chalon to the west and northwest of Athel Loren. Thus began the first major conflict of an ongoing war that has continued to be waged ever since, known as the Secret War. For the passing of many seasons, Athel Loren was riven with warfare as Morgr strove to break Ariel's power, leaving the forest scarred and wounded. Part of Morgr's primal nature spoke to the forest's heart, and parts of Athel Loren rebelled. For a long and terrible year, the natural order of Athel Loren was disrupted, for Cairns could seemingly not be slain by the weapons of the elves, and recovered from even the most heinous of wounds, be they inflicted by an archer's arrow or Orion's mighty spear. Worse yet for the elves, the trees and spirits of Athel Loren did not succumb to Cairns' taint all at once. Countless times in battle with the beasts, the elves would be on the brink of victory, only to have it snatched from their grasp as the madness of Cairns seized spirits that moments before had been their allies. This madness was not always lasting, but seemed to have a deep and enduring effect upon the dryads, whose capricious and malevolent nature had only ever been held in check by the mighty tree-men. This terrible conflict was only ended when Cairns was slain at the Battle of Anguish. The site of this battle, the Glade of Woe, still bears the mark of Cairns' death, where Coadil, one of the most ancient tree lords, seized the beast demon. As Morgr attempted to free itself, Ariel summoned all of her power and smote him a single blow that battered through the creature's defenses and shattered his mutated form, whilst leaving Coadil seemingly unmarked. A giant, blackened, and twisted oak tree, with branches like claws raised in anguish and outrage, marks the place where Cairns was slain, the place where his tainted lifeblood was spilt. Alas, the tears of Aisha appeared on the fair cheeks of Ariel, for as soon as the beast was slain, she could feel it being reborn in another forest, far away across the mountains. It seemed Cairns could not be destroyed so easily. Twice more in the history of the Wood Elves the vile creature Cairns has been slain, once by the legendary Scarlock and his scouts, and once by the ancient and volatile tree-man Durthu. Yet always it is reborn elsewhere, hungering to despoil Athel Loren. If he were to succeed, Athel Loren would be transformed into a nightmare place of horror and despair that would spread like a vicious plague across the old world. The Betrayal. 500 years after the Battle of Anguish, Athel Loren once more knew internal strife. The tree lord Coadil, driven perhaps by a last taint of Cairns' madness, and who had begun to harbor a deep resentment of the elves, sought to disrupt the rebirth of Orion. That winter Coadil and his dryad handmaidens did not sleep, but bided until Ariel began her long sleep within the Oak of Ages. With much of the forest slumbering, and the elves unaware of his intent, the ancient strode to King's Glade and slaughtered all he could find, for if no wild riders lived to lead the ritual of rebirth, Orion would be severely weakened if indeed he could be summoned at all. Though the wild riders fought back, they were dulled by Winter's grasp, and their blades could not pierce Coadil's thick hide. As elven blood was spilt upon the ground in Kingsglade, Ariel was abruptly awakened from her slumber. In a great rage, she sped to where the wild riders fought for their lives. Against Ariel's fury, Coadil and his followers could not endure, and she scattered the ancients' handmaidens before her and cast down the Tree Lord. Though she dearly wished to slay the spirits for the damage they had caused and the blood they had shed, Ariel could no more end their existence than sever a portion of her own soul, for Coadil was still bound to Athel Loren, and Ariel was bound to the forest. Instead, she banished the Tree Lord and the Dryads who had followed him to the dark and wild corner of Athel Loren, far in the southeast where no elves dwelt. The wild wood was then encircled with a fence of waystones, and Coadil was imprisoned forever amongst the shadow glades to brood upon his betrayal. Since that day no elf has set foot under the eaves of Coadil's prison, for to do so is to walk with death as their only companion. Coadil may silently contemplate his fate, but his handmaidens have been driven mad by their exile, and restlessly stalk the glades with cruel desires in their hearts. The Bretoni. For the next 1,000 years the Wood Elves lived in virtual isolation, healing the hurt done to Athel Loren by the Beastmen, and viciously slaying any who dared to enter its boundaries. The Bretoni tribesmen had by now claimed the lands surrounding Athel Loren. The Wood Elves were content with this unofficial arrangement, for they seemed now to have an unwitting ally protecting the western fringes of the forest. However, this time of recovery was brought to an end when the green skin menace, always a dangerous threat, burst forth from mountain and cave to launch a massive and destructive attack upon the Bretoni. Worse, the borders of Athel Loren became constantly assailed, so that the defenses of the forest were stretched to the limit. It looked as if the Bretoni would be destroyed, for they were a divided people and were being picked off one tribe at a time. The prophetess Naiath scried into the future and saw on many of the twisting future threads that the survival of Athel Loren relied on the survival of these human neighbors. However, so great were the numbers attacking Athel Loren itself that the Wood Elves could not spare any warriors to aid the Bretoni. It was then that the vision of the Lady of the Lake appeared to a young Bretoni warrior lord, Gilles the Breton. With this vision filling Gilles with strength and fiery resolve, he united the scattered tribes and rode across the lands, slaughtering the greenskins in every battle. Urged on by visions of his goddess, he rode across the plains to the burning outskirts of Athel Loren. There, the Wood Elves rode out of the forest to join him, and fighting as one, they broke the armies assailing Athel Loren and rode them into the ground. Thus an uneasy alliance was formed with the Bretonians, though the Wood Elves are an unpredictable and mistrustful ally at best. King Louis the Rash, Gilles' son, formalized the alliance between the two people in a grand banquet ceremony that several Wood Elf emissaries endured. Indeed, some even believe that one of these emissaries has remained in Bretonia ever since, in disguise. It is rare but not unheard of for elves of Athel Loren to fight alongside the Bretonians in battle, only to disappear once victory has been won. Nevertheless, the Bretonians still regard Athel Loren as a fearful haunted place, and are right to be wary of it. There are many nights throughout the year when the humble Bretonians dare not venture out, but rather lock and bar their doors, and pray to their lady goddess to protect them, for fear that they will be caught up in the wild hunt of Orion, or be drawn into Athel Loren by malicious spirits, never to be seen again. Despite, or perhaps because of such dangers, many knights enter its borders in order to fulfill quests or to prove their bravery, though most are never seen again. The Battle of Pine Crags. In the year 1350 of the imperial calendar, a dwarf expedition led by Grungy Goldfinder descended from the Grey Mountains into Athel Loren. The elves regard the dwarfs as destructive, greed-filled, ugly creatures oblivious to the beauty of the natural world, who burn the forests to feed their machines and spend their lives devoted to grubbing in the earth, searching for precious metals and stones. As such, when Goldfinder and his warriors advanced along the Pine Crags ravine, the elven lord Findul, hatred burning within his heart, quickly gathered his forces to attack. The elves peppered the dwarves with bowfire, infuriating the proud Grungy. Wishing to face his foe toe-to-toe, if not eye-to-eye, he ordered his troops into tight shield walls and marched towards the elven line. Thus the dwarfs were drawn further into the ravine. Brightly painted dwarf slayers recklessly raced at the elves and were led deep into the forest, where they were slowly picked off one by one without ever getting close to their enemy. Elven mages ensured that the retreat of the dwarfs was closed, as the forest closed ranks and ensnared the dwarves in the trap. Grungy, realizing he was surrounded, formed his followers into a solid square shield wall, but his doom was already assured. The dwarves were slowly cut down by the withering fire from the elves. Grungy was the last dwarf left alive, and he stood surrounded by his slain kin, swearing and bellowing in rage. The sister twins of the Pine Crags, the legendary Naestra and Orion, finally slew him, simultaneously sending arrows thudding into his eyes. The bones of the dwarf expedition now adorn the eateries and nests of the majestic eagles and vicious war hawks that dwell in the height of the crags. The Battle of the Cairns. Scattered through the wild heaths on the outskirts of Athel Loren are countless ancient burial cairns, mounds, and barrows. Some of these were built by the first elves that dwelt on the edge of the forest, though a great many of them are from early human barbarians. Many priceless and powerful artifacts were buried within these barrows, though the wood elves, respectful of such places and their long-dead inhabitants, leave them as they have lain for countless centuries, slowly to be reclaimed by the forest. Nevertheless, there are many greedy tomb robbers who covet the riches within these tombs, and so the wood elves are constantly battling against these intruders. But sometimes interlopers seek these cairns for more sinister reasons than simple greed. In the winter of 2495, a dark and evil being sought to claim these cairns. This hated creature, cursed and despised by the wood elves, was the Lich Master Heinrich Kemmler, a necromancer of awesome power. A cunning and devious foe, Kemmler carefully counted the passing of the twin moons through the dark skies, and eventually conducted a vile dark ritual on the winter equinox, when Athel Loren is at its weakest. All over the wild heath the tombs and cairns were opened from within by cold and lifeless skeletal hands, and bronze-bedecked ancient warriors marched out to form a mighty army. Screaming carrion birds filled the skies as the army of the dead marched through the snowdrifts and entered Athel Loren. Dark dryads of winter, crone-like and hate-filled, assailed Kemmler's army at every step. Waywatchers arose from the snow to launch their unerringly accurate arrows, before disappearing once more. Nevertheless, their numbers were too few to halt the unliving. A grand battle finally took place in a massive glade, deep within Athel Loren's borders. Thousands of stoic external guard advanced on the foe, led by the warrior elder Sheolan, while glade riders galloped around the flanks. Overhead, Yithel, the hawk-eyed, and his kin swept down time and time again through the thick clouds of crows and ravens to attack the long-dead warriors. Many elves were slain that dark day, but the undead were finally stopped, and Kemmler fled away. This was the furthest into Athel Loren any attack has ever reached, and as such, the Wood Elves are hungry for vengeance against the hated Lichmaster, and are ever watchful for his return. In the decades since Kemmler's defeat, Athel Loren has known relative quiet, though great battles and desperate times have unfolded in the lands to the north. Such respite is certain not to last, for whilst those such as Kyanather, Kemmler, and a myriad others still live and desire the power of the forest, Athel Loren will know no lasting peace. Events. The Wood Elves do not measure time in the same way that others do. Indeed, in Athel Loren time becomes nearly meaningless, as it ebbs and flows at various rates in different places. For the Wood Elves there are only 3 times: the time before Ariel and Orion, the past, the rule of Ariel, the present, and the death of the forest, the future. For the sake of simplicity and clarity, this timeline is presented in accord with the imperial calendar, IC. Negative 4120. The elves land in Elfin Arvan, later known by men as the Old World. The elven prince Malekith befriends the dwarf king Snorri Whitebeard, and together the armies of the elves and the dwarves begin to drive the remnants of chaos from the lands. As the colonies prosper, wealth begins to flow back to Ulthuan. Negative 2840. The Phoenix King Belshazzar the Navigator visits the newly founded dwarf city of Karaz-Akarak and signs the pledge of eternal friendship between dwarves and elves. Malekith remains as ambassador. Negative 1997. War breaks out between the High Elves and the dwarves and rages for 2 centuries. The elf colonies in Elfin Arvan bear the brunt of the hostilities, and both nations become weakened by the conflict. Tor Alessi, later the Bretonian port of Langille, is besieged many times. Dwarves chop down entire virgin forests to spite the elves. Elves guard the forest of Athel Loren. Negative 1589. Caradriel, the Phoenix King of Ulthuan, recalls the High Elf armies from the Old World to combat the menace of the Dark Elves threatening Ulthuan. Many see the departure of the armies as a betrayal. Some colonists reluctantly abandon the Old World, but others decide to stay. Negative 1501. The last High Elf army departs from the Old World, leaving behind a few hardy colonists who refuse to go. These include those living on the edge of Athel Loren, who are joined by others who abandon the coastal colonies. They declare themselves independent of the Phoenix throne. They become known as the Wood Elves. Negative 1500 to negative 1000. The declining dwarf empire is further shattered by earthquakes. From this time, orc and goblin tribes pour over the lands, pillaging the abandoned elf cities and ruined dwarf holds. Wood elves guard Athel Loren from intruders. -1125. The Winter of Woe. A huge orc and goblin army ravages Athel Loren. Orion and Ariel become king and queen in the wood, and Orion slaughters the orcs. -1095. Ariel becomes aware of the creature called Cairns, sometimes known as Morgr, Lord of Skulls. -1000. The lands surrounding Athel Loren are settled by people of the primitive and warlike Bretoni tribes. -815. The cursed Cairns launches a great war against Athel Loren, thus beginning the secret war between the Wood Elves and the Beastmen. -813. The Battle of Anguish, where Cairns is slain, though at great cost. -700. The kindred of the Whittleglades leave Athel Loren and migrate over the Grey Mountains, passing into legend as the Lost Kindred. Cairns is reborn into the Drac-walled forest and begins to corrupt it into a twisted and dark place. -650. Attempts to penetrate Athel Loren by the Bretoni leave only a handful of survivors, driven mad by the Fey terrors, and the forest enters Bretonian folklore as being a haunted magical place. -625. The Betrayal. Coadil the Tree Man attacks King's Glade, slaying many wild riders. Only Ariel's intervention prevents a great tragedy from unfolding by defeating Coadil. She banishes him to the wildwood and cages him with waystones. -400. The eccentric spellweaver Ranu uses his powers to create the Tower of the Eternal Wood. After he enters, the doors are sealed and refuse to open for any other. -250. Dwarf traders, prospectors, and treasure hunters begin penetrating the western old world once again. Some enter Athel Loren and encounter the Wood Elves. Old grudges dating back to the War of the Beard are revived, leading to bitter battles. -15. Sigmar unites the tribes east of the Grey Mountains and forges the Empire. 700 to 900. Some foolish Bretoni warlords enter Athel Loren, intending to carve out new domains. Some disappear without trace, with their entire retinues. Others flee the forest in terror. Henceforth no Bretoni dare enter the forest with hostile intent. 976. Gilles the Breton is visited by the Lady of the Lake. She blesses him and his comrades, and encourages them to band together to unite the Bretoni and rid the lands of evil. Gilles becomes the first of the Grail Knights, and the Lady of the Lake becomes the primary deity of the Bretonian nobility. 977 to 978. The 12 famous Battle of Gilles the Uniter. He rallies the Bretoni and rids the lands of evil in the name of the Lady of the Lake. His fourth great battle takes place on the edge of Athel Loren, alongside the Elves, saving the forest from the axes of the orcs. 995. Gilles the Breton is mortally wounded and carried to a nearby lake. There he is placed on an unearthly ship and sails into the mists to join with the Lady of the Lake. Some believe he lives on as the Green Knight. 1001. The Fey Enchantress is appointed to oversee the Bretonians. She is also set the task of weeding out those humans who display magical powers, but not the skill to control it. 1005. Louis the Rash, Gilles' son, sends the envoy to the king and queen in the woods and recognizes Athel Loren as an independent realm. In return, Ariel and Orion offer friendship with Bretonia. 1050. The branch wraith Drycha passes beyond the boundaries of the wildwood and meets with Coadil. The two remain there for several months. 1137. The Wood Elves fight a great battle against beastmen led by Cairns within the Forest of Shadow in the Empire. Spell singers of great power manage to bind him with their magics and draw him into Athel Loren itself. Here he is slain by the ancient tree man Durthu. 1203. The war dancer Sirenaville travels deep into the vaults of Winter. She defeats the guardian of the caves and retrieves many lost elven artifacts. 1336. Duke Melmon of Cunel disappears on the night of the spring equinox. Stories say he was caught up in the ghostly great hunt that is said to roam the skies on certain nights. Others say he wandered into Athel Loren drawn there by Fey lights. 1350. Battle of Pine Crags. A dwarf army seeking treasure in Athel Loren meets its doom among the forested crags and ravines. 1400. The portals to the Tower of the Eternal Wood become unsealed. It is found to be completely empty. No trace can be found of the spell weaver Ranu. 1578. The Bretonian tournament of Guyenne takes place, in which King Jules jousts with one of the Fey folk of Athel Loren and is victorious. 1601. The High Elves of Ulthuan attempt a rapprochement with their estranged kin in Athel Loren. The emissaries meet with Ariel, who rejects the offer of closer ties with the High Elf court, and become lost in the forest on their departure. 1670. Battle of the Meadow Glades. An army marching from the Empire invades Athel Loren and is ambushed and routed. 1672. At the close of the year, the High Elf emissaries finally emerge from Athel Loren near Cunel, but are immediately assumed to be evil spirits by the Bretonian peasantry. Heavily outnumbered, they are slain and their bodies burnt. 1673. The wild hunt inexplicably rides only through the lands controlled by Cunel. The Duke and his family are all slain, save his youngest daughter, who is spirited away into the forest by dryads. 1697. In the winter of this year, the warden of the Crystal Mere, Lady Elionette, thwarts an attempt made by Drycha to disrupt the waystones of Coathil's prison. 1703. Working under commission from Lady Findal, the master smith Daith creates the Spirit Sword. Findal refuses payment, claiming a non-existent fault within the blade, but relents when Daith rouses the forests against Findal's hall. Daith is never denied payment again. 1813. The Elves of Athel Loren came to the aid of the Bretonians besieged at Brionne and Cunel by the Skaven hordes. The elf army joins up with the army of the Duke of Paravent, and together they inflict a crushing defeat against the Skaven. 1925. Dwarven traders traveling to Paravent are attacked by orcs out of the Grey Mountains. Much to the incredulity of the dwarves, a wood elf war band led by Gwethyrk the Huntress sallies out of Athel Loren and routs their attackers. 2007. The monstrous Cairns is once again destroyed by the wood elves. He is slain by Scarlock and his masterful scouts, pierced with 100 arrows. 2202. Orcs chased out of Bretonia during the Errantry Wars attempt to escape by hiding in Athel Loren. Such are their numbers, they reach as far as Durthu's heartlands, where they are finally crushed by Durthu, his handmaidens, and Rhaelairan, the guardian of the Blessed Grove. 2231. Ariel weeps as the chaotic creature Cairns is reborn into the world. Several warrior kindreds shadow walk to the forest of Arden, passing unnoticed through Bretonia in order to slay the foul beast. while still a youngling, yet their attempt fails, defeated by teeming hordes of beastmen. He begins to corrupt the forest of Arden. 2285. Orion's wild hunt breaks through the borders of Athel Loren and rampages through Cunel, as it does every summer solstice. However, this wild hunt causes absolute mayhem, leveling several villages and driving many Bretonian peasants mad. 2336. A man emerges from Athel Loren claiming to be Duke Melmont of Cunel. Within hours he ages dramatically and dies within the day. 2495. Undead forces stirred up by the Lich Master Kemmler attack the realm of Athel Loren in an attempt to invade Bretonia, but are destroyed by the Wood Elves at the Battle of the Cairns. Kemmler escapes. 2512. Nath the Prophetess has a vision showing the death of Athel Loren. Ariel directs the nobles of the forest to begin hunting the beastmen in the wider world. 2518. The branch wraith Drycha attacks several villages in the vicinity of Paravent, leaving neither survivors nor a hint of motive. 2522. Ariel believes that Kyanathere rallies for yet another assault upon Athel Loren. Guardians of Athel Loren, Elven Highborn, and Nobles. The lords and ladies of Athel Loren have led the Azrai in peace and war since the Elves first came to the forest. Wood Elf nobles commonly inherit rank according to the station of their birth, though it is not unknown for a valorous individual to be elevated to higher authority. He who is claimed by the wild riders to become Orion is often such a one. Several nobles command small kin bands, whilst the most senior lords have authority over several leagues of the forest, and, by extension, the elves that live within the land. Some follow the ways of particular kindreds, learning the way of the war dancer or way watcher, should it prove to be the calling of their heart. Unlike the elves of Ulthuan, and indeed much of the known world, most wood elves make no distinction between male and female when it comes to all duties, whether these responsibilities find their calling in war or peace. In the noble houses of Athel Loren, the daughter is as likely to inherit the family title and rank as the son. More so, in fact, in certain families whose reverence for Ariel borders on fanaticism, or houses that culture the belief that the females make for less impulsive leaders than the males. Each highborn, no matter his or her relative rank, is required to keep his domain free from intruders, and has the ultimate responsibility over the area of the forest in which his followers dwell. Most often this is a task that is accomplished by the noble's eternal guard and glade guard, though in more difficult times he or she will entreat the spirits of the forest to lend aid to the cause. This one calling is held above all others, for the forest is sacrosanct to the Azrai, and must be defended against those who would do it harm. Should a noble fail in his or her responsibility, it is not unheard of for them to hand their duties over to another. Leaving their great hall, they depart the safe paths of the forest and travel to the darker places of Athel Loren, where the pathways twist in upon themselves, and malicious spirits dart between the trees. There the noble will seek atonement with the spirit of Athel Loren. Some are not seen again save in dreams and memories. Others return within a few hours of their departure, but unnaturally aged, as though many decades had passed in that time. A very few return after many years, reinvigorated and filled with purpose by their communion with the forest. When Athel Loren goes to war, the nobles direct the efforts of its armies, often commanding a varied yet lethal assortment of elves and forest spirits. In the summer months, when the forest is strong enough to defend itself against most threats, many are caught up in the reckless abandon of Orion's great hunt, consumed by the purity of the purest of prey. Even so, there are always a handful of the most able war leaders and their kin bands who remain within the borders of the wood, ready to defend their home to their dying breath. Elven mages. Like all of their race, the elves of Athel Loren are intrinsically magical beings, their consciousness residing on the physical and magical planes in equal measure. In most, this talent is too weak to be developed, instead representing itself as occasional hunches and forebodings. But in some truly gifted individuals, it can be shaped into a tool of great power. Such a boon is not without danger to the user, for raw magical energy is a fickle and destructive thing if drawn upon unwisely. The high elven mages of Hoeth protect themselves from its ravages through a process of ritual and ceremony, using structure to control the sleeping beast. For the wood elves, however, their protection comes from an entirely different source, that of the forest of Athel Loren. The forest's natural web of consciousness forms both conduit and shield to the elven mages, who would draw upon this potent force. As a result of this connection, wood elf mages have an altogether unique relationship with the forest. In some ways, they are a part of greater intelligence, much as the dryads, spites, and treemen are, yet they retain their individuality in a way that the wood spirits do not. This bond allows them to commune with the forest, able to entreat with it on behalf of the elven lords and ladies when their needs would otherwise go unnoticed. Only the greatest of tree singers can rouse a slumbering treeman before its time. Some particularly powerful mages can use their bond to reshape the forest itself, whether that means changing the course of a tree's growth, or more dramatically, reshaping the pathways within the forest to slow enemies or hasten the progress of the elves. Such a process is by no means certain, though, for the forest must be persuaded or tricked to do so, and will often refuse such requests. As with almost all aspects of wood elf life, the path of the mage is trod by males and females in equal numbers, though female mages, often known as the handmaids of Ariel, are generally more powerful than the male, made so by Ariel's unique bond with Athel Loren. The ability to shape and guide the forest is seen as a useful skill by more than just the elves. Though the banished Fey of Athel Loren's wild wood have little use for the Ozrai, they crave the ability of the tree singers and will go to any lengths to make any promises to lure them into their service. It is a rare thing for a mage to succumb to the will of the Shadow Fey. Even so, it is an ever-present peril, and mages must always guard their minds against the constant whispers, particularly in the winter months, when the power of the wild wood's otherworldly shadow glades is at its height. On the rare occasions that the wood elves willingly enter into discourse with other races, it is invariably the mages who perform diplomatic roles, traveling with small entourages to the courts of foreign kings. To avoid potential danger while on such journeys, the mages will commonly focus their powers into weaving a spell of protection about themselves and their companions, moving them beyond the physical realm and mundane hazards. Such groups often appear as translucent silhouettes and pass through physical obstacles without hindrance, giving rise to countless peasant folk tales of ghostly travelers that stalk the lands about the Everwood. Spellsinger kindreds, kindreds of Kel Aisha, sometimes known as handmaidens of the Everqueen, priestesses of Athel Loren. Spellsingers and spellweavers are generally part of a kindred of Kel Aisha. The name Kel Aisha has evolved from the elven root word Kul Aisha, meaning the tears of Aisha. Sorry, mercy, endurance, and mourning for lost children. Glade Guard. In times of need, every wood elf can answer the call to defend Athel Loren, for all are trained in the arts of the longbow as soon as they can hold one. When an elf comes of age, he or she will be formally inducted into the household's kin band of Glade Guard, and given responsibility for patrolling of a section of the forest. Completely in tune with the rhythm of their forest home, individual Glade Guard warriors are entirely self-sufficient, able to live off the land as they patrol the forests and watch for interlopers. Should such a sentry sight an intruder, he or she will swiftly raise the alarm and await assistance. In a mere span of moments, the forest will be alive with sharp-eyed elven hunters, all focused upon seeking and slaying the intruder in their midst. Most who enter Athel Loren die without ever realizing they are in danger. When Athel Loren goes to war, the Glade Guard form the bulk of the army, a deadly corps of skilled archers that can often put a foe to flight before the battle has truly joined. Each elven household fights together on the battlefield, some kin bands becoming formal units commanded by a noble. Other warriors, the most skilled and adventurous of each hall, often those well on their way to following the calling of the Way Watcher, form into bands of scouts who infiltrate the enemy battle line and sow disruption in their wake. The Wood Elf army can often seem haphazard and slightly disorganized to their foe, for each band of Glade Guard is expected to follow the broad dictates of the general, but, at the same time, is encouraged to take the initiative when the opportunity presents itself. Such a principle often leads to an overlapping line of battle, with individual Glade Guard kindreds advancing and retreating like leaves in a storm, all the while pouring a hail of deadly arrows into the foe. Glade Riders. The Glade Riders are perhaps the greatest horse warriors of the old world, their elven reflexes allowing them to perform all manner of seemingly reckless acts that are far beyond the abilities of the lesser races. Whether firing backwards while riding full pelt through deep woods, or darting through the ranks of surprised enemy outriders, Glade Riders routinely survive their escapades unscathed through a formidable combination of graceful skill and unflappable confidence. Unlike most cavalrymen, Glade Riders do not view their horses as property or subservient beasts. Instead, over a period that can last many years, a deep and lasting connection is formed between rider and steed. The bond goes beyond friendship and beyond family, so that horse and rider act as one being, communicating on a level that is impossible for an onlooker to detect. Where another would have to command his steed upon the path he needs it to follow, it is as though the Glade Rider need only think the command, and the horse will respond as required. When their steeds are not needed for battle, their riders pasture them in great glades hidden deep within Athel Loren. This is not because they fear their horses will stray, for the bond between them goes too deep for that, and the horse will always come when summoned, but is done for the protection of the steed. Many are the winding ways beneath the leaves of Loren, but those paths that lead to the stable glades are very well hidden. Indeed, some can only be reached by traveling through the elven halls themselves. Only a very determined and lucky horse thief could find his way there safely, and none have ever made it back out again. Warrior kindreds, kindreds of Lakois. The warrior kindreds make up the vast bulk of the armies of Athel Loren. They generally include glade guard warriors and will sometimes include glade riders, warhawk riders, and other warrior castes. The name Lakois has evolved from the elven root word Lakoi, meaning might, glory, and fear of death. Eternal Guard. Through the long winter months, the forest of Athel Loren is at its lowest ebb, made dormant and vulnerable through the cycle of the seasons. The treemen slumber, and even the normally lithe dryads are sluggish and slow. During this time, guardianship of the most sacred of places falls to the Eternal Guard, sons and daughters of the noble houses of Athel Loren. Only skill on the field of battle can earn an honored place within the ranks of the Eternal Guard, for their duty is a difficult and dangerous one. Should the forest be assailed in the frozen months, they can depend upon little or no aid from Athel Loren itself, and will be called upon to hold fast against whatever threat comes to challenge them. Sometimes in the bitterest of weather, when the shadow Fey stir from the wild wood to claim the Oak of Ages for their own, the threat comes from within, and not from without. Regardless of whether the foe be fairy spirit, marauding beast-man, or questing knight, the Eternal Guard stand firm before it. Each guardian is a formidable foe in his or her own right, trained to a pinnacle of skill that other races cannot easily match. When assembled in numbers, they form a deadly and steadfast phalanx, their spear staves thrusting and cutting with a graceful yet disciplined efficiency. Though their chief duties are tied to the cold months, the Eternal Guard are called upon to serve all year round, whether as the watchmen and arbiters of the elven halls, or as bodyguards for the greatest of elf nobles. The Eternal Guard hold duty to their lord high above personal danger, often fighting without thought to their own safety, whilst their lord or lady has need of their service. On at least one occasion, the Eternal Guard have fought on for many long hours and into the night, though their allies have fled or been slain, steadfastly defending their charge from harm. Come one foe or 100, it matters not. The Eternal Guard does not surrender. Dryads. Dryads are spiteful and deadly creatures with hearts akin to shards of ice. In the soul of a dryad there is neither room nor regard for compassion or mercy, merely an uncompromising dedication to Athel Loren that makes even the most heartfelt vows of elf or man seem trivial by comparison. To harm the forest is to incur the wrath of the dryads and invoke a deadly and unyielding vengeance that will follow the transgressor until his body has been ruined and broken at their hands. Dryads are able to shapeshift into different forms, often mimicking the appearance of elves, appearing as unearthly, lithe, and beautiful maidens, albeit often with a greenish hue to their skin and twigs in their long cascading hair. With her beguiling beauty and the haunting melodies of otherworldly song, a dryad entices her victim into the shadowy depths of the forest. Only when the hapless prey is completely under her spell, their mind lost in a cloud of desire and promise, does the dryad strike. Sloughing off her beauteous form, she transforms into her war aspect, the hatred and spite within her soul, remaking her outer appearance into a thing of horror. Her hair becomes a twisted mass of thorns, briars, and twigs. Her face distorts into a terrifying and savage visage. Her limbs turn long and wood-like, and her fingers become vicious talons capable of rending and impaling her prey. Before the victim has even registered his predicament, his blood is spilt upon the hungry ground of the forest, and his body ripped limb from limb with implacable savagery. Only a fool deliberately offers insult to a dryad, but these spirit women are so utterly different to mortal creatures that offense is often taken, whether it was intended or not, a mistake rarely made twice, and then only if the individual in question is either very lucky or very swift. When Athel Loren takes the field of battle, the dryads assume their war aspect and hunt upon the flanks of the army, answering to the call of the branch wraiths, the oldest and most powerful of their number. Their lithe and swift nature allows them to cover great distance at speed, falling with ease upon a foe who, until moments before, thought themselves safe from harm. Indeed, a surprise attack by hissing and darting dryads is oftentimes the first warning an enemy will have that Athel Loren marches against it. That, or their general disappearing from camp in the still watches of the night, only to be found shredded and lifeless in a nearby glade at the dawn the next day. Treekin. Athel Loren is inhabited by many strange and powerful beings, many of whom are as ancient as the forest itself. They watch over those that enter their realm with distrust and suspicion. In spirit form, these creatures are insubstantial and may appear as little more than glowing spheres of light, though they can take physical form at will and change their shape at whim. In times of conflict, these spirits can bind themselves to the husks of dead trees and fallen branches, making the silent form uproot itself and meld into a powerful shell with which they can oppose interlopers. Once the threat has passed, or the battle is over, the spirits will leave the tree once more, a dark and silent shadow, bereft of life. In motion, these vessels appear as a horrifying parody of a man, the one that stands well over 8 feet tall on its gnarled and twisted legs. Lacking any of the outward signs of true life, these beings are completely motionless at rest, indistinguishable from the lifeless hulks from which they are formed, with nothing to betray the essence that lurks within. Nonetheless, they remain fully aware and ready to strike with lethal ferocity should an enemy stray too close, waiting with unceasing patience for weeks upon end should it be required, and more than one careless trespasser has had its life cut short in such a fashion. When the summer comes and the wild hunt begins, dozens of treekin will be drawn to the call, their arched and gnarled forms following in Orion's wake. In Bretonia alone there is a score of folk tales that tell of trees driven by a terrible hunger, and variants of these tales are recounted as far away as Kislev. There is no doubt that such a sight speaks to the deepest primal fears of mortal creatures, particularly those who gather firewood from living trees. For it is as if the forest itself has come alive to reclaim the land that has been stolen from it in centuries past. When autumn comes and the hunt subsides once more, the spirits abandon their adopted forms and return to Athel Loren, leaving a ghostly forest of dead trees in their wake, into which only the very boldest venture. Tree men. Some of the more powerful and ancient of Athel Loren's spirits are able to entwine their essence with that of a living tree, molding it to their will. It is not a decision taken lightly, for when a spirit forms a bond with a living tree, they become irrevocably merged and cannot choose to leave. Only death can sever the connection. From that moment on, the will of the spirit shapes and drives the tree, using knotted bark and gnarled branches to serve where an insubstantial spirit form cannot. Terrifying to behold, these behemoths smash apart all who stand against them, and are almost impervious to harm. Foes are swallowed whole by gaping mouths, and open in the tree trunks of these mighty beings, the corpses providing the host tree with nourishment for many years. These mighty tree men are revered by elf and forest creature alike, and are often infested with lesser spirits living amongst their branches, roots, and hollows. These incredibly ancient beings have seen entire races rise and fall, like the ascent and descent of the sun, and understand the passing of time in a completely different way to mortal creatures. Even the long-lived elves seem to pass into dust at an alarming rate to these tree men, the oldest of whom can remember times before the footsteps of the elves left a mark upon the world, and can expect to remain when the elves walk no more. Of all the tree men of Athel Loren, there are those, old beyond mortal reckoning, whose names are revered above all others. When first the pact between forest and elf was formed, it was they who spoke on behalf of the forest. Yet they were ancient even then. Like their younger brothers, these ancient ones can pass through the centuries in dormancy, tended by small groups of dryads. Of them, Adonhu, eldest of all treemen, is considered most wise, his experience keenly sought after by the elves. Dirthu, scarred many centuries ago by dwarves, who were either incredibly foolhardy or brave, is a creature driven to the brink of madness by his hate of all who would harm the forest, and even the elves are wary when in his presence. Another ancient, Rydizan, is a mystery to the elves, and rarely seen, for since the days of the pact he has walked alone, unswayed by petition or plea. He sees to the needs of the forest in his own way, and refuses to be distracted from his purpose. Perhaps he has come to regret the alliance between Athel Loren and the Osrai, though why this should be remains known only to him. Though one of the three is always awake to watch over the forest, the others will occasionally rouse in response to a great peril overtaking the forest. More commonly, tree singers will supplicate themselves before these slumbering forest lords, entreating them to rise to the defense of Athel Loren. Way Watchers. Guardians of the paths leading into Athel Loren, the Way Watchers are silent and deadly sentinels. They are masters of concealment, and have trained themselves so that they can lie unnoticed and unmoving for days on end, before springing into action to slay a startled and unfortunate prey. Most commonly, the way of the Watcher is the natural progression for those who have trained as scouts, though more rarely unblooded youths feel the call of the forest coursing through their blood. Over time, an elf may find that they are more comfortable in the embrace of the forest than in the presence of his or her kin. they will drift further from the halls, spending more and more time in the forest, honing their deadly skills. Many never return from this journey, for there are corners of Athel Loren that are dangerous even to the elves. Yet those who survive are skilled beyond compare and hardened by their experiences. Taciturn and solitary individuals, Way Watchers can let years pass between visits to Wood Elf halls, for they are perfectly at ease within their forest homeland. Way Watchers survive by their wits and cunning in the wilds, gathering and hunting what they need, and honoring the ancient spirit of Athel Loren through their day-to-day actions. On the rare occasion that a Way Watcher returns to the halls, they stand apart from all others, even family, for in their own distinct way they are closer to the forest than other elves. No two Way Watchers behave in the same way, for each is taught by their experiences and trials rather than any formal system of training. Long years of practice with their chosen weapon has left each Way Watcher capable of a tremendous rate of fire, able to lose an unerring stream of black-shafted arrows, one after another, seemingly without pause and without loss of accuracy. Few who have not seen the skill of the Silent Watchers believe the truth in these tales, and few who do see it survive to speak of it. Nonetheless, it cannot be denied that any who enter Athel Loren run the risk of being slain without warning by the Way Watchers, cut down by unseen archers, or falling prey to their cunningly constructed traps. When the call to battle comes, the Way Watchers band together into small groups. Their uncanny skills naturally lend themselves to the arts of disruption and surprise, appearing silently next to a vulnerable enemy, and vanishing as quickly as they came, before his body hits the ground. War Dancers. War Dancers rove across the length and breadth of Athel Loren in tightly knit troops, treading paths and secret ways that few others know of or dare use. They are welcomed to elven halls and treated with the utmost respect, yet also with more than a little fear and wariness. Other wood elves regard the war dancers as wild and unpredictable, and not without cause, for they are the servants and worshippers of the elven trickster god Loic, a deity whose conventions are a mystery to those not already committed to his path. Sometimes known as feastmasters for their role in great festivals, the servants of Loic lead the elves in music and rejoicing, and perform the intricate dance rituals that reenact the history of Athel Loren, a form of storytelling just as important to the Wood Elves as the more conventional methods of song smithing and writing. To a war dancer, even other elves appear to be moving painfully slowly, for every move made by one of the kin of Loic flows into the next, and thence the next one after that, without conscious thought or guidance. Foregoing armor, the war dancers decorate themselves with swirling designs and dye their hair in bright colors, taking on the roles of mythical figures and ferocious warriors, their form of movement and even their fighting style, paying homage to the one who inspires their dance. In battle, war dancers are deadly warriors, leaping over the enemy and twisting mid-air to strike them from behind, darting out of the way of blows and able even to dodge incoming arrows. Such is their sublime skill and grace that they dance rings around their enemies, darting in to strike fatal blows and pirouetting elegantly out of harm's way before a foe can react. To many they seem like forest demons, intangible and unassailable beings who cannot be thwarted or denied whether by steel, stone, or strength of will. The heralds of Loic are made even more formidable through their war dances, the favored rituals of the trickster god. No rhythm is called for these dances, nor are instructions issued. Instead, each dancer instinctively settles upon the correct pattern to strengthen and complement the dance of the rest of the troupe, an effect that creates a web of movement as graceful and beautiful as it is deadly. Each dance functions not only as a different discipline of battle, but also as an affirmation of faith and a reenactment of a past victory. In this way, the war dancers celebrate their great triumphs of the past, even as they carve the shape of a new one upon the bones of their enemies. War Hawk Riders. Many large birds of prey live in Athel Loren, especially where it covers the foothills, ravines and crags of the Grey Mountains, making their eyries high amongst the towering pinnacles of rock. These hawks and shrikes commonly grow to far grander proportions than the similar species found elsewhere in the Old World, though why this should be remains a mystery. Some scholars speculate that such birds were once a common sight across many lands, but have long since been hunted into extinction in the more accessible places, whilst others claim that they have been changed by magic. Wherever the truth lies, the hawks of the Grey Mountains commonly grow to such a vast size, boasting wingspans that can average 15 to 20 feet. Indeed, though most elves live beneath the protective shade of Athel Loren, there are those who crave the more sparsely forested uplands of the Grey Mountains, and so a strange kinship has been developed between the two races. Upon the middle slopes of the mountains, elven halls are fashioned close about the great rocky spires, in which the hawks make their nests. Eyries adorned with the sun-bleached bones of those who have dared intrude upon their territory. A fledgling chick raised by an elf develops a powerful, nigh unbreakable connection with its bondmaster. Should it be required, a hawk raised in such a manner will carry its rider into battle without question, swooping upon the foe and rending with its cruel beak and swift talons. This bond ties both parties together, for the elves who choose to become warhawk riders are bound over to the needs and care of their mount, just as the hawk is to the elf. As time passes, the lives and essences of both rider and hawk become more and more entwined, so that they almost become one creature, existing for the call of the hunt and the thrill of the chase alone. In this way, an intruder who strays into the pine-strewn crags faces not only the fury of the hawks, but also that of the elves, as several dwarf expeditions have found to their cost. Flying high above the treetops of Athel Loren, the warhawk riders scout the area for approaching enemies, and are skillful enough to guide their warhawks down through the trees, to strike at intruders should occasion demand it. Those who ride the warhawks display phenomenal agility and balance, able to launch volleys of arrows while their mounts fly at full speed through the forest. Wind Rider Kindreds, kindreds of Sethiala. Sometimes known as Brethren of Seth or Dawn Riders, the Wild Rider kindreds hail mostly from the Pine Crags, where their mounts live unrestrained, by the dense forest canopy of the lower reaches of Athel Loren. Members of the Wind Rider kindreds are often reckless, secure in the knowledge that the swiftness of their mount can carry them unharmed through great danger. The name Sethaila has evolved from the elven root word Sethai, meaning flight, wind, and cry in the far mountains. Wild Riders of Kurnos. The Wild Riders of Kurnos are Orion's personal guard, as aggressive and impulsive as he. They are fey and dangerous creatures who are no longer truly the elves they once were, but are now a part of the Wild Hunt. Throughout the winter months, while their king's spirit is dormant, they watch over King's Glade with eyes aglow with fairy fire, unspeaking and unmoving, save to challenge those who have come to the most sacred of groves. Their authority is absolute, for in accepting the honor of becoming a wild rider, they have become severed from Wood Elf society in all ways except that of service to their king. Though they are revered and honored, most elves avoid dealings with the kin of Kurnos where possible, intimidated by the aura of power and otherworldly presence of the tall warriors who are now as much forest spirit as they are elf. Once a warrior's foot is set upon the path of the wild rider, there can be no return. Yet none refuse its call, for it is the highest honor that can be bestowed. When winter rolls into spring and the ritual of Orion's rebirth begins, his wild riders lead the ceremony, binding themselves anew to the Ever-King with each stage in the ritual. In a night of magic and terror, when ghostly shapes and eerie cries haunt the glades, the Lord of Athel Loren is roused once again from his sleep. The clarion cry of Orion's horn rings out across the moors and heath surrounding the forest, and the wild hunt begins anew. All of Athel Loren trembles as Orion's footsteps thunder through the forest, gathering speed and followers with every stride. In his wake come the wild riders, made stronger and more ferocious by the awakening of their lord, and mounted upon the swiftest of steeds. Only the bravest or most foolhardy individuals remain aboard when the horns of the wild riders answer that of Orion, for their otherworldly tones invoke the fear of the prey in all who hear them. Such an instinct is well-founded, for there is no mercy to be had from the wild riders, who are as driven and deadly as their lord. Anyone foolish enough to be espied by them is ridden down without mercy, their death a sacrifice to the purity of the hunt and glory of the king in the woods. Younger kindreds, kindreds of Haroith. A kindred that tends to attract young elves. This kindred is typified as being impatient and impulsive. Many elves leave this kindred when they are older, though other wilder elves will stay within the kindred. A mistrusted kindred by other wood elves, most regard them as not understanding balance, and they are therefore dangerous, often the first to react violently. The name Haroith has evolved from the elven root word Harathoi, meaning youth, boundless energy, and jealousy. Elven steeds. Descended from the purest of all equine bloodlines, the steeds of the wood elves are swift and graceful, with an agility that cannot be matched by the lesser breeds employed in other kingdoms. Where the Bretonian warhorse and the stallions of the imperial stables are bred for strength, endurance, and dog-like loyalty, the horses of Athel Loren are trained from birth to be swift, agile, and cunning, to work in partnership with their riders, and not merely to be broken to their will. The steeds reared in this way form a lasting bond with their rider, resulting in darting and dangerous grace few other cavalrymen can match. In times between war, the horses are pastured in hidden glades until their rider summons them once more. Those rare outsiders who catch a glimpse of such a beast at play upon the heath often refuse to believe that these horses are truly mortal, assuming instead that some strange fey creature has crossed their path. In truth, there is little more magical about the steeds of Athel Loren than any other inhabitant of the wood, merely the boundless joy of a creature born into freedom and not into bondage. Glade Rider Kindreds, kindreds of Sehenlu, also known as kindreds of Equos in the southwest, horsemasters, saddleborn, and the rider kin. A noble that rides an elven steed will often be from a kindred of Sehenlu, or was once a part of one of those kindreds. The name Sehenlu has evolved from the elven root word Senlui, meaning swiftness and accuracy. Forest dragons. At first thought, it seems incredible that a creature as vast as a dragon could make its home in the dense forests of Athel Loren. Yet, in the deepest recesses of the chasm glades lurks a distinct race of great sky worms, who long ago adapted to life amongst the greenwood. Protected by the forest canopy and shielded by the sheer rock faces of the chasms from the attentions of young heroes seeking to make names for themselves, the dragons thrived and multiplied. Such providence has proved itself a stark contrast to other places in the old world, where dragons and their kin have long since either been slain or driven into the mountains. Nothing dwells in Athel Loren without being changed, and the forest dragons are no exception. Like certain groups of wood elves, the dragons have slowly been made over into an aspect of the forest, and can almost no longer be considered beings in their own right, but an extension of the forest's will to survive and prosper. Though still voracious predators, the dragons hunt only when the forest has need of them, resting in a state of hibernation the remainder of the time. Should a foe too mighty for Athel Loren's tree spirits intrude upon the sanctity of the wood, the forest will awaken one, or sometimes several of these giant beasts, to serve as a steed for a worthy highborn. Such a counter is as one-sided as it is savage, for few creatures can resist the breath of a forest dragon, a cloying green vapor that induces a raging fever in all who breathe it, sapping their will and driving them into a coma from which there is no awakening. Their duty done, and their appetites satisfied by the flesh of the foe, the dragons then return once more to their silent slumbers, until called upon once again. Great Stag. No beast in all of Athel Loren is treasured more than the great stag, a creature that the wood elves revere as representing the true soul of the forest. Wherever the truth of its nature lies, the great stag is unquestionably a magical creature, though apparently one of a nobler caste than the unicorn. Such a beast only ever seems to appear in portentous times, commonly when great danger threatens the forest, though one is occasionally in evidence at times of great celebration, and is interpreted as a great blessing when it does appear. Once or twice in a generation a great stag may seek out a particularly noble or courageous wood elf, and consent to be their steed in a battle to come. Such a thing is seen as a boon beyond all others, for not only is the stag a formidable opponent in battle, its very essence can inspire those about it to greater heights of bravery. Infrequently encountered as the great stags are, to see the white hart of Athel Loren, a mighty stag of unsurpassed nobility and grace, is rarer still. Only one of these noble animals is ever sighted at one time, and it is a common belief amongst the Osrai that there has only ever been one, that it is an immortal facet of the forest that never grows old or dies. Vengeance kindreds, kindreds of Talu, a very small kindred devoted to revenge for acts of particular harm, either to Athel Loren or personally. This is an unusual kindred in that those who join it only do so for the fulfillment of a particular vendetta, and they then return to their former kindred. To stay too long within the kindred of Talu is particularly dangerous. One cannot leave the kindred without fulfilling the reason he or she entered it, and elves will only become one of this kindred very rarely. Those belonging to this kin are known by names such as Riftblades and Morn Singers. The name Talu has evolved from the elven root word Thalui, meaning hatred or vengeance. Unicorns. Though they in many ways resemble large and powerful horses, unicorns are very different beasts, as the single horn that protrudes from their foreheads suggests. Like all the magical creatures of Athel Loren, they form part of the web of consciousness that weaves the forest together, and are something quite fundamentally different to that which they appear. Unicorn ivory is a much sought-after prize in certain corners of Bretonian society, and many a gallant knight has met his end pursuing a unicorn deep into Athel Loren. The knights invariably follow the unicorns for many miles, the beast staying just slightly out of reach the entire time. Just as the brave warrior thinks he has cornered his prize, the creature disappears without warning, coincidentally within feet of a swarm of vengeful spites or coldly vigilant way-watchers. Being magical creatures themselves, the very presence of a unicorn is harmful to other creatures summoned or created through sorcerous means. The selfish nature of the unicorn means that it tends to feel no kinship with such creatures, despite their common origins. If anything, they pity such beings for their ill luck in not being created as unicorns. Curiously, unicorns tend to have an underlying affinity to those who possess knowledge of the arcane arts. They are drawn to female mages as moths to a flame, as the taste of true magic is somewhat intoxicating to them. Most elven mages find this an acceptable situation, as a tame, or at least willing unicorn, is an excellent and durable steed, though it would be wrong to assume that the beast is broken to the will of the rider. They simply both tread the same path for a while. Furthermore, the unusual nature of the unicorn provides the mage with a measure of protection against hostile magics, with a devastating spell often resulting in little more than a slightly inebriated and emboldened steed. Great eagles. There has always been a great bond of kinship between the elves and the great eagles, stretching back to the birth of the elven race. That bond remains strong between the wood elves and the noble avians, and many families of eagles choose to make their home in the heights of the Grey Mountains, close by the borders of Athel Loren. More intelligent and nobler of aspect than the smaller warhawks that live on the lower mountain slopes, the eagles are creatures of unceasing vigilance, possessed of an abiding loathing for creatures of evil heart. Ever alert to the events occurring in the lands beneath them, the great eagles unceasingly carry news to the elven nobles that dwell far below, giving them a welcome and often crucial advance warning of invasion or strife. On rare or desperate occasions, an eagle may offer himself as a mount to a particularly trusted elf, a great honor in the eyes of the wood elves. Such acts invariably form the start of a great and enduring friendship that continues to bind both parties, even after death. Orion, the King in the Woods. Orion is the consort king of Athel Loren. At the height of his power in midsummer, Orion is a terrifying being of majesty and power. He stands over 10 feet tall, and his lithe green-tinged body ripples with barely contained anger. As the moons align overhead on Midsummer's Eve, a beautiful cloak crafted by his queen is draped over his shoulders, and the great horn of the wild hunt is placed reverently before him. As the time of the conjunction draws near, he takes up his weapons from their shrine within the Oak of Ages. At midnight, Athel Loren goes utterly silent, not a creature stirring, for all know that the ride of the wild hunt has come. The spirit of Kurnos flares brightly within Orion at this time, stirring the hearts and souls of the wood elves. Savage excitement and restless vigor spreads like wildfire through the forest, as the blaring of his hunting horn resounds through all of Athel Loren, and the earth thunders with the pounding of his cloven hooves. Every elf and forest spirit feels the pull of his savagery, and many are overcome by the primal urge to join his wild ride and commit acts of untold savagery and vengeance on their foes. To stand in the path of Orion is to stand before the fury of the storm, and few can resist his awesome power. Nevertheless, the fire of Orion burns but briefly, for just as each spring he is reborn, each winter he must perish. This is the way of all things, and is merely a continuation of the never-ending process of death and rebirth. Orion's power runs rampant each midsummer, yet each midwinter he voluntarily offers himself up as sacrifice to the cycle of existence. Drycha. Most believe that Drycha lost her mind when Morgur's death soured the ground of the Glade of Woe, the area of Athel Loren to which she was bound, though in truth the branch wraith was capricious and hostile for many years before this. As with many of Loren's spirits, Drycha is incredibly old and is said to remember the days before the coming of the elves. She recalls these times with anger and sadness, for she believes that the alliance between Athel Loren and the Osrai has brought little but destruction to the forest, even though the intervention of the elves almost certainly saved Athel Loren from the axes of the dwarves. Indeed, she rarely converses with others, even the dryads who serve her as handmaidens, but instead chants, mantra-like, the names of all those fellow spirits whom she believes have been failed by the elves. As old as she is, and with a memory still possessed of crystal clarity, it is doubtful that she will ever reach the end of her tally, for new names are added with every battle between Athel Loren and the outside world. In the early years of the alliance between the elves and forest, Drycha was ever in evidence in the glades and groves of Athel Loren, watching the elves and examining their every action for any sign of betrayal. She has been seen little in the years since Morgur's blood was spilt upon her glade, though she is known to commune with Coadil, a treeman of great age and power, and serves as his herald while the great being sleeps through the centuries. Such a thing cannot help but provoke unease, for Coadil's distrustful attitude of the Osrai is legend. He is so incredibly ancient that it is difficult to be certain as to his motivation, for Coadil has forgotten more than many younger beings, the elves included, will ever know. If these two embittered spirits have found common cause, it can only be a matter of time before the balance of Loren Forest is thrown into dismay. In recent years, strange tales have begun to reach Athel Loren, causing great concern amongst the councils of the Wood Elves. On the fringe of the great drac-walled forest in the Empire, the peasants tell stories of the trees that come alive, hungry for blood. On the edge of the Forest of Arden, in Bretonia, some villagers gather only dead wood for their purposes, citing tales of other villages found ruined and torn, the inhabitants left as scraps of tattered meat by the vengeance of the trees. Though some of these events bear the hallmark of attacks made by the Osrai, they were not instigated by Ariel's court. To many they seem as senseless as they are apparently random, yet if these attacks are indeed the work of Drycha and her handmaidens, there must surely be a greater goal behind them than mere slaughter, though what that goal is remains to be seen. Even Nyeth the prophetess cannot see the destination to which Drycha strives, for it is drenched in blood. Nyestra and Arhan, sisters of Twilight. High in the alpine slopes of the pine crags, the eyrie of Twilight dominates the skyline. These are the elegant halls of the sisters of Twilight, the twins Nyestra and Arhan. War dancer kindreds throughout Athel Loren dance the tale of these mysterious elves, telling the story of a young elf child named Naestrahan that wandered deep into the depths of the wild woods. Alone, this young girl stumbled through the dense undergrowth, led by glowing fairy lights and darting spites. Deep into the darkness she was led, into a place that even the Way-Watchers feared to go. The family of the girl-child were distraught, but accepted that she had been claimed by Athel Loren. Many years passed before a battle was fought at the feet of the Grey Mountains. Foul beastmen had lit great pyres, and the trees of Athel Loren cried out silently in pain as they were torn from the earth and heaved onto the blaze. Drawn by the ripples of pain that spread through the forest, the Wood Elves assailed the despoilers the next morn, but they were too few in number to prevail. Hundreds were slain by elven arrows, and Witch Wethel the Wild led his war dancers in acrobatic dances that slew countless more. But it was not enough to halt the creatures. Brutal gores fought their way through the hail of bowfire and began hacking apart the elven archers, spilling much precious blood. Amidst the carnage, a pair of elven maidens appeared, descending into the clearing crouched upon the back of an ancient dragon of the deep forests. The warrior maidens were identical in all ways but one, where one had hair as dark as night, the other had hair of purest white. The ancient dragon tore through the beastmen, scattering those that it did not rip limb from limb. The warrior maidens fired their bows as entangling briars sprung up to halt those who sought to flee, and great magical fires consumed those who fought on. The dark-haired elf maiden leapt gracefully to the ground to tend the wounded, while the pale-haired twin, still upon the back of the great dragon, launched into the air in pursuit of the fleeing beasts, intent on slaying every last one. It slowly became apparent that in the depths of the magical dark woods, the girl-child Naestrahan had become something altogether different and strange. and that those two war maidens were linked somehow to her. Some speculated that one was the real girl, while the other was merely a powerful changeling. Yet the wisest spellweavers said that it was as though the one child had been split into two separate beings. Each sister represented the divided yet balanced nature of the wood elves themselves. Where one sister is light, one is dark. Where one is filled with anger and lethal destructiveness, the other is calm and serene. They reflect opposing, yet harmonious aspects of Athel Loren itself. The sister twins are masters of the wild beasts that dwell within Athel Loren. These creatures adore Niestra, and will do as she wishes out of love, while they fear Orion, and so do as she wills out of respect. In times of strife and need, the sisters ride forth from their mountain eyrie borne upon the back of one of these faithful beasts. Orion takes savage pleasure in cutting down her foes, while Niestra does so with tears in her eyes. Fey Magic of the Wood Elves. The elves are able to manipulate the winds of magic with a grace, ease, and flair unmatched by any of the younger, cruder races. Wood elves are no exception, and there are many skilled practitioners of their own particular fey strand of magic within the bounds of Athel Loren. Wood elf mages tend to follow the path of the ancient elven god of renewal and rebirth, Aisha, and are sometimes known as handmaidens or stewards of Ariel. Skilled in the arts of spell weaving, they are able to manipulate the energies of Athel Loren in many varied ways. They are adept at creating powerful illusions and glamours, as well as being masters in the mystical arts of healing and regrowth. They are capable of weaving spells of confusion and trickery that can ensure that an intruder will be unable to discover an elven hall, even if he walks only feet from its majestic doors. They can cast dangerous blasts that strip trespassers of their wits and memories, and heal grievous wounds with but the touch of a hand. They are capable of encouraging trees and undergrowth to spontaneous growth, which can then be directed to create elegant and artful forms. In this manner, the elves can create beautiful artistry, such as delicately twisting pillars of living branches that form the basis of graceful monuments and structures. Trees and foliage can be encouraged by skillful wood elf mages to uproot and move about, blocking off paths and creating new glades. This is often used as a subtle warning, and most will be so unnerved by this that they leave Athel Loren immediately. But those that choose to ignore such warnings are dealt with without mercy. Other wood elf mages specialize in learning the secret magical paths of Athel Loren, enabling them to disappear like smoke, only to reappear in a completely different location. Wood elf mages are capable of all manner of fey sorceries and artful spells, and are rightly feared by all.